I read this book and it said in it the best place to network is a funeral when it comes to the political capital, which I think some may raise their eyebrow at. But I think if you think about and you can very much say that's not tasteful, it's not respectful. But Lindsey Graham was, of course, quite the operator himself.
Right, Katy, let's get cracking. President Trump meeting Netanyahu. Do we have any sort of understanding of what the relationship between these two is actually like?
I think it's always been a complicated relationship when it comes to US presidents and Netanyahu, and Trump is no exception to this. Certainly, we know that in recent weeks and months, it's been a more strained relationship. Even this visit, it was rumored a few weeks ago, and then you had some on the US side saying he was never due to come the week it was mentioned. It was the Israeli side pushing it to almost suggest that he was more in than he was. We know that the parts of the Republican base that see Netanyahu as a warmonger, someone who's pulling Donald Trump into this Iran war, one that he now wants out of, in their opinion. And therefore, they probably view his appearance and any conversations he has with the US president with suspicion. But we also know at the same time that the Iran war is really in a bit of a stalemate right now. And there are hawks on the other side of the Republican movement who will probably like what the Israeli leader has to say to the US president and hope that he might encourage him to take bolder action.
It's interesting to try to predict what Trump we will see in action, and how much, I suppose, time he will have for Netanyahu. Will it be about dressing him down? Will it be about trying to land a point? The Americans have been fairly calm, I think, in Iran the last couple of days. Is that an expectation of this meeting with Netanyahu, for example, to sort of set a bit of a context for conversation?
Yeah, well, we know that we've had last week, days of ramping up action, various, blows exchanged between the two sides, and a pause when it came to the end of last week into the weekend because they felt that negotiations were perhaps starting again. Still, Trump is saying negotiations are ongoing. I think there's definitely a wariness when it comes to probably Trump's narrative on the entire war, whether it's saying it's going well, whether it's saying negotiations are good, or saying that he's willing to retaliate or even escalate. There's a question as to, how much appetite does he have to do that? But I think the Israeli leader coming to DC, I mean, the fact he has a meeting in itself shows that relationship is still there. And I think the question is, can Netanyahu, when we think about his role early on convincing Trump to, take action in the first place, the fact he had a seat in the Situation Room, pretty exceptional for a foreign leader to have a place there, as first revealed by the New York Times. They obviously have a close relationship. You have a Lindsey Graham documentary, so the late politician, whose funeral is also being held tomorrow in DC, or being held on Tuesday in DC, in this documentary that's yet to be released, saying that, Netanyahu and Trump are the perfect pair. They're the ones that can, end the evil Iranian regime. So the question, I suppose, is can the Israeli leader use this to try and get Trump back on side when Trump has quite clearly in public appearances been losing patience with them?
Yeah. The official sort of briefing, I suppose, about what this meeting will discuss is the framework agreement for peace in Lebanon, as well as the conflict in Iran, sort of as an overarching thought, and efforts to expand the Abraham Accords. Has there been any kind of willingness from Netanyahu on any of these fronts, I suppose, to meet Trump where he is on these particular issues?
Well, I think it goes back to events we had last week, which was a deal, or seemingly a deal, announced with Saudi Arabia for domestic nuclear power, which ruffled feathers in DC. Some Republicans who thought, we should not be getting into nuclear in the Middle East. Is this going to start to eventual arms race situation? And then a deal that appeared to be signed and agreed. And then Donald Trump at the last minute via Truth Social saying this deal only goes through if Saudi Arabia sign up to the Abraham Accords. And that means, of course, recognizing Israel in a way they had previously seemed disinclined to do. So you can expect that to be a topic of conversation. I also think on the Lebanon point, we know that Trump has been frustrated with Netanyahu at the G7, which I attended, he was talking to reporters about how he felt that the Israelis had used too much force in Lebanon, and was even saying the Syrian leader might do a better job of policing it. So these are both contentious issues in their own way.
One of the crucial parts of this couple of days for both leaders is the electoral context in which they both find themselves. Trump's got the midterms on the way, and Benjamin Netanyahu is trailing in opinion polls at home before Israel's vote in the autumn as well. How important, how significant is a functional relationship with President Trump when it comes to Netanyahu's electoral prospects?
I mean, I think for the Israeli domestic situation, there's a question as to, when the US is backing this war and, going in lockstep with Netanyahu, it tends to be better for the leader. I think to the point about what happens if these elections don't go in the Israeli leader's favor, I mean, there is some thinking in DC that a less divisive leader than Netanyahu could actually be quite good in the medium to long term for agreeing some of these things with some of these other countries when it comes to getting backing for Israel. But I think it's pretty grey, and it's obviously quite hard to predict how the whole thing is going to be shake out. And you've also had a situation where both of these politicians have been written off many times before and have, defied their skeptics in various ways.
Yeah, that's an absolutely valid point, especially when it comes to Trump. I find the whole sort of tension around these meetings really interesting, and what will be done in the main room with the two leaders, and what may be discussed on the sidelines, and even what may come up at the funeral of Lindsey Graham as well. Like that is a sort of great stage for Netanyahu to be meeting, well, all sorts of people actually who will be at that funeral and be having little side conversations here and there too.
Yeah, I remember before I moved to DC, I had a drink with someone from the British Embassy in Washington who was in London. And they said, you need to read This Town, about a book about how DC operates before you go over. And I read this book, and it said in it, the best place to network is a funeral when it comes to the political capital, which I think some may raise their eyebrow at. But I think if you think about and you can very much say that's not tasteful, it's not respectful. But Lindsey Graham was, of course, quite the operator himself. And I think if you look at the cast that we're expecting tomorrow at this funeral, you can imagine that Netanyahu will be among those using it to land their message. And then, of course, you also have tomorrow the fact that Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, is also going to be in the White House on the current schedules that is before Netanyahu, but it just adds to the sense that, you have the Ukraine war, you have the Iran war. I think at different stages, the leaders wanting different things, but also you have Zelensky, for example, trying to almost make the case that Russia is helping Iran to try and get Trump more supportive of Ukraine. And in a way, this all plays into one when it comes to, I suppose, the grand strategy that Trump has to consider.
Katy, that is brilliant. Thank you ever so much for doing that. Really appreciate it.